Day 2 of Cleveland Browns training camp just happened, and nobody is ready for what Shedeur Sanders just put on tape. Not the analysts who buried him in draft coverage. Not the reporters who turned his name into a punchline. Not the front office voices who sat there on draft night and watched him slide all the way to round 5 like he was an afterthought. None of them were ready for what just happened on that practice field. And honestly, after everything this young man has been through in the last 12 months, I need you to understand exactly what today actually meant before the wrong people spin it into something small. Before we get into all of it, real quick, drop one word in the comments right now. Just one word that describes what you think about Shedeur Sanders as of today. One word. That is all. Let it fly down below because I want to see where Gridiron Ground family actually stands on this man before we break it all the way down.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Here is the thing about footwork that most casual football fans never actually think about. It is not glamorous. Nobody is making highlight reels about a quarterback's drop-back mechanics. Nobody is clipping a clean weight transfer onto their Instagram story. Nobody outside of actual football people is sitting there watching a practice video and zooming in on where a quarterback's back foot lands before he throws. But the people inside those buildings, the coaches, the coordinators, the veterans who have been in this league long enough to know what separates guys who make it from guys who flame out, those people watch nothing but footwork. Because footwork is where everything starts. Accuracy lives in footwork. Timing lives in footwork. The ability to translate genuine arm talent into a ball that actually arrives exactly where it needs to be, on time, on target, with the right velocity, that all starts from the ground up, every single time. So when the Browns coaching staff came out earlier this offseason and specifically named Shedeur Sanders' footwork as a point of emphasis he had worked on and improved, that was not a throwaway compliment. That was not a coaching staff trying to pump up their rookie to keep him mentally engaged heading into camp. Coaching staffs in this league do not hand out technical compliments for free. They are too careful with their words, too aware of how everything gets picked apart and reported, to just casually tell the media that a quarterback has cleaned up his footwork unless they genuinely mean it and have genuinely seen it on film. And then day 2 of training camp arrives. No pads on yet, just quarterbacks and rookies working through reps together in the summer heat. And Shedeur Sanders goes out there and puts exactly what that coaching staff described on full display. You watch the drop back and it is clean. You watch him line up his body with intention, not just going through motions, not just getting through the rep to get through the rep. You watch him push off that back foot with real purpose and deliver a throw to Denzel Boston that hits exactly where it is supposed to hit. That is not a coincidence. That is not one good rep in a sea of mediocre ones that somebody decided to clip and put online to manufacture hype. That is a young quarterback executing something that was specifically identified as a weakness, that he reportedly spent the entire offseason addressing, and then demonstrating that the work actually translated when it counted. That matters enormously in the context of what Shedeur is trying to accomplish this summer. Because it is one thing to work on something in private, in a training facility, with your personal quarterback coach, away from any real pressure. It is a completely different thing to walk into an NFL training camp environment, with coaches watching every single rep with clipboards in hand, and execute that same clean mechanics under that kind of scrutiny.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
The fact that he did it on day 2, before pads are even on, before the real physicality of camp kicks in, and the mental load of a full playbook gets heavier and heavier, that is a genuinely encouraging sign about where his fundamentals actually are right now. And the Denzel Boston connection is worth paying attention to separately, because quarterback-receiver chemistry does not just happen. You build it rep by rep, day by day, through the kind of early camp work we just saw flash on that practice field. The fact that they are already finding each other in the very first days of work together tells you something real about both of them. But clean footwork and one good rep are just the beginning of the story here, because the competition Shedeur is walking into is a lot more complicated than it might look on the surface. Let's be completely honest about something that a lot of people in the media are dancing around without fully saying out loud. This quarterback competition in Cleveland is not a formality. It is not a predetermined outcome dressed up in press conference language to make everyone feel better about a messy situation. There are real, legitimate arguments on multiple sides of this debate, and anybody telling you it is already settled in either direction before a single padded practice rep has been taken is selling you something. Shedeur is more talented than a significant portion of the football-watching public actually gives him credit for. That needs to be said clearly and fairly before anything else. The one real extended look he got last season came under circumstances that would have made any quarterback look shaky. Cleveland's offensive line last year was genuinely problematic. Pass protection was inconsistent. Running lanes were unreliable. The kind of surrounding infrastructure that allows a young quarterback to actually show what he can do in an NFL system was simply not there. So judging Shedeur's ceiling based entirely on what happened in those circumstances is not actually fair analysis. It is just lazy. Now add 5 new starting offensive linemen to the equation this offseason. 5. That is not a tweak. That is not a few upgrades here and there to address a couple of weak spots. That is a near-complete renovation of the most important unit on the entire offense, brought in specifically because the front office recognized that what they had up front last year was not going to cut it. A new offensive line coach is tasked with getting that group to actually function as a cohesive unit, which is its own enormous challenge given how much turnover there is. But the intention behind the move is clear. They want to give whichever quarterback wins this job a legitimate chance to actually succeed. Then there is the Deshaun Watson reality that everyone in Cleveland knows is sitting quietly in the background of every single conversation about this quarterback situation. Before the injuries, before everything that came after his time in Houston, Watson was a genuinely elite NFL quarterback, Pro Bowl level. A player who kept his team in real playoff contention multiple years, running on the strength of his individual talent alone. Nobody with any fairness is erasing that history. But 2 separate Achilles surgeries is an enormous physical hurdle. The road back from one Achilles is brutal enough on its own. 2 of them in sequence changes the conversation about what a quarterback's legs and mobility look like coming out the other side. And for a player whose game was always built significantly on the threat of what he could do outside the pocket, that matters. And then Todd Monken arrives as the new play caller, and suddenly the timing argument starts making real sense. Monken has a reputation around the league as someone who genuinely elevates quarterback play, who designs systems that get the best out of his signal callers rather than forcing quarterbacks to fit a rigid scheme that does not match their skill set. That is exactly the kind of play caller a young, athletic, dynamic quarterback wants walking into his first real shot at a starting job.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
The system, the timing, the personnel renovation, all of it is lining up in a way that creates a genuinely open path for Shedeur Sanders to take this job through pure on-field performance. The phrase perfect timing keeps coming up in coverage of this situation, and honestly, it is the right phrase. But timing alone does not win anything. You need the weapons to make it real. One of the most underrated parts of the entire Shedeur Sanders conversation this offseason is the receiving room he is walking into. Because when everybody is so locked in on the quarterback battle itself, and the offensive line renovation and the Watson uncertainty, The actual pass-catching talent surrounding whoever wins that starting job tends to get glossed over. And it should not, because this group is quietly more interesting than it gets credit for. Jerry Jeudy is the headline name, and we have already given that dynamic its own full breakdown on this channel, so we are not going to rehash all of that ground again today. But what is worth noting about Jeudy in this context is that he is a legitimate NFL wide receiver who has shown real top-end route running ability when he has been healthy and surrounded by a functional offense. That is not a nothing piece to have at the top of your receiving depth chart as a young quarterback trying to establish himself. Beyond Jeudy, Isaiah Bond is a name that deserves more attention than he is currently getting in the broader conversation. Young, fast, with the kind of quickness in and out of breaks that creates problems for cornerbacks when a quarterback is confident enough to trust him in tight windows. The development of that relationship between Bond and whoever ends up under center is going to be one of the quieter but genuinely important subplots of this entire camp. Then you have the rookies, and this is where it gets interesting in a very real way. Carson Concepcion is a name to watch as camp progresses, and the competition gets more physical. And Denzel Boston, as we already saw on day 2, is not waiting around for an invitation to make an impact. The fact that he and Shedeur were already clicking in those early non-padded reps tells you that Boston came into this camp ready to compete and ready to build something real with the quarterback he is working alongside. Chemistry at receiver is not something you can manufacture on a schedule. It either develops naturally through repetition and trust, or it does not. What we saw on day 2 suggests it is already starting to develop. At tight end, Harold Fannin is in the mix as a genuine receiving option in the middle of the field, and Elijah Moore brings versatility to the room in a way that gives a creative play caller like Monken real flexibility in how he designs the attack. These are not placeholder names just filling out a roster. These are credible pieces to build a real passing game around. And then there is the running back room, which has its own quietly compelling storyline developing. There is footage circulating right now of one of the backs in that room doing legitimate hill sprints in the off-season. Full speed, no shortcuts. The kind of conditioning work that immediately signals to anyone watching that this player understands exactly what kind of season is sitting in front of him. Contract year energy is real in this league, and a running back who is out there doing old-school hill work in late July when nobody is technically required to be doing anything yet. That is a player who is mentally locked in on making something happen this season. A productive ground game does not just help a running back pad his stats. It changes the entire environment for the quarterback behind him. Play action becomes a real weapon. Pass rushes slow down. Coverages open up. And a young quarterback gets cleaner looks and higher percentage throws rather than having to fight through chaos on every single drop back. If you have been watching this channel for any amount of time, you already know I do not shy away from telling you what the actual most important factor in a given football situation is, even when it is less exciting to talk about than the skill position storylines getting all the attention. And right now, heading into Browns training camp, the single most important variable in this entire equation is not the quarterback competition. It is not the receiver room. It is not what Todd Monken is going to draw up on the whiteboard when the pads finally come on. It is that offensive line. 5 new starters up front. 5. Let that number sit with you for a second, because it is genuinely unusual to see that much turnover in a single off-season at the most physically demanding and technically complex unit on the football field. Building cohesion along an offensive line is not something that happens quickly. It requires repetition. It requires trust. It requires every single player in that unit developing an almost instinctive understanding of what the 4 guys next to them are going to do in any given situation before it actually happens. That kind of cohesion takes time to build, and it is absolutely not guaranteed to be there by week 1 of the regular season. A new offensive line coach has been brought in specifically to accelerate that process and get the most out of a group that has not played together before. That is a significant coaching challenge, and how that coach approaches the work through the rest of camp and into preseason is going to tell us a tremendous amount about where this unit is actually going to be when the games count. Here is why it matters so much for Shedeur Sanders specifically. A young quarterback in only his second year in this league, in the middle of an open competition for a starting job, needs time to see the field. He needs time to go through his reads, identify the coverage, and deliver the ball with confidence. None of that happens when a pass rush is collapsing the pocket before he can even complete his drop back. The single biggest reason Shedeur's rookie season did not look the way his supporters hoped it would look was the pressure he was taking on a snap-by-snap basis. When you are running for your life on the majority of your dropbacks, you cannot show what you can actually do as a passer. You are just surviving. If this new offensive line gels even reasonably well by the time the season starts, the entire picture of what Shedeur Sanders is capable of changes dramatically. Play action works because the defense respects the run. The pocket holds long enough for routes to develop downfield. The quarterback can actually step into his throws with clean mechanics instead of improvising under pressure every single play. The difference between a quarterback who looks limited and a quarterback who looks like a legitimate starter very often comes down to what is happening 5 yards in front of him on any given snap. If the line struggles, though, none of the optimism about Shedeur's footwork development, none of the excitement about Denzel Boston or Isaiah Bond or Jerry Jeudy, none of Todd Monken's play-calling creativity is going to matter in any meaningful way. You cannot build an offense on a foundation that is crumbling every time the ball is snapped. So Gridiron Ground family, keep your eyes on that offensive line all camp long, because that unit's development is quietly the story that determines everything else. Let's zoom out from the internal Cleveland storyline for a second and talk about the actual division this team has to compete in. Because optimism about a retooled offense and a young quarterback with upside is one thing. But the AFC North is a completely different conversation, and it deserves to be treated honestly rather than glossed over because the Browns have a good day 2 of camp. Baltimore is sitting there with Lamar Jackson operating at a genuinely historic level. Back-to-back MVP awards. A player who has essentially redefined what the quarterback position can look like in the modern NFL when you combine elite arm talent with that kind of mobility and football intelligence. The Ravens are not a concern on the horizon somewhere down the road. They are the standard the rest of this division is currently being measured against, and that standard is extremely high right now. Cincinnati still has Joe Burrow, who when healthy is as talented a pure passer as there is in this entire league. The Bengals have gone through their own turbulent stretch with injuries and roster transitions, but a healthy Burrow with real weapons around him is an offense that any defense in this conference has to take seriously. Pittsburgh is Pittsburgh. They find ways to be physical, disruptive, and relevant in this division every single year regardless of what the outside roster analysis says about them heading into the season. Underestimating Pittsburgh in the AFC North is a mistake with a long and documented history. So where does a Cleveland team with 5 new offensive linemen, an unresolved quarterback competition, and a defense that just lost one of its most dominant players actually fit in that picture right now? Honestly and fairly, they are not the favorite in this division. They are probably not the second-place projection either, if you are being completely clear-eyed about it. But the sneaky upside argument is real, and it deserves to be stated without overselling it. If the offensive line renovation pays off faster than expected, if Shedeur Sanders walks into that starting job and immediately plays with the confidence and clean mechanics he showed on day 2, if Todd Monken's reputation as a quarterback developer translates quickly into actual production on the field, and if the defense holds up reasonably well despite the significant loss at the edge. This team has a legitimate path to being a much tougher out in this division than any of the current projections suggest. Not a division winner, not a Super Bowl conversation, but a team that can steal games against the teams ahead of them and make life genuinely difficult for every opponent on the schedule. In a division this competitive, with a team going through this much transition, being a legitimate tough out is actually a meaningful outcome. It protects draft capital. It builds culture. It gives a young quarterback real meaningful game experience in difficult environments. All of that has compounding value as you build towards something bigger over multiple seasons. The risk, of course, is that the line does not gel. The quarterback competition stays unresolved longer than it should, and the team spends the first month of the season in a kind of organizational limbo that costs them winnable games early. That is a real possibility too, and pretending it is not does not help anybody. The AFC North will expose every single weakness this roster has, and it will do so quickly. Which is exactly why what happens in the next few weeks of training camp is so much more important than one clean day 2 practice. Let's talk about something that does not get nearly enough serious attention in the Shedeur Sanders conversation. And that is what it actually takes mentally to go through what he went through on draft night and come out the other side of it locked in and ready to compete rather than broken and bitter about everything. Going into that draft, Shedeur Sanders was projected by a significant number of analysts as a first-round quarterback. Some had him in the top 15. His college production was real. His football IQ was consistently praised by people who watched him operate within a complex system at Colorado. His arm talent was never seriously questioned by anyone doing honest evaluation. And then the draft happened, and round 1 passed without his name being called, and then round 2, and round 3, and round 4, and it was not until the 5th round that Cleveland finally took him. 5th round. For a player who by almost any reasonable pre-draft analysis had no business being there. The public nature of that fall made it worse. This was not a quiet slide that happened off camera somewhere. Every pick that was not Shedeur Sanders got covered in real time on national television, with analysts speculating on air about why teams were passing on him, with social media reacting in real time, with the cameras occasionally cutting to him sitting there waiting while the entire football world watched. That is a brutal experience for any human being, let alone a 22-year-old who has spent his entire life being told he has the talent to play at the highest level. And then what he said publicly about how he is approaching all of it is where it gets genuinely interesting, because it does not sound like the typical chip on my shoulder locker room speech that players in his situation tend to give. He talked about not carrying attachments to outside things that could pull his mood down. He talked about staying in control of his emotional state every single day, not just on the days when things are going well, but every single day as a deliberate discipline. He talked about studying that self-awareness within himself as an ongoing process, rather than something he figured out and filed away. That is a level of emotional maturity that is genuinely unusual for a player at his stage, and it is the kind of internal foundation that separates players who let difficult circumstances define them from players who use difficult circumstances as fuel without letting the anger turn into something destructive. A bitter quarterback makes mistakes in big moments because his decision-making is clouded by emotion. A locked-in quarterback makes reads based on what the defense is actually giving him, because his mind is exactly where it needs to be on every single snap. And all of that internal work is happening in the context of a player who, despite the 5th-round draft position, despite a rocky rookie season behind a shaky offensive line, despite all of the outside noise and media criticism, still managed to rank among the highest jersey sellers of any rookie in this league last year. That number tells you something real about the kind of cultural gravity Shedeur Sanders carries into every room he walks into. Fans are invested in him. They are watching him. They are buying into the possibility of him in a way that goes beyond just football analysis. That kind of connection between a player and a fan base is genuinely rare, and it creates its own kind of pressure and its own kind of motivation simultaneously. The question now is whether the mental foundation he is describing publicly is actually going to hold up when the pads come on and the competition gets real. Here is the important context that keeps everything from day 2 of Browns training camp in the right perspective. The pads are not on yet. That needs to be the disclaimer attached to every piece of optimism coming out of this camp right now. Not because what happened on day 2 was not encouraging, because it genuinely was, but because non-padded quarterback and rookie workouts in late July and full-speed padded practice against a real starting caliber NFL defense are two completely different environments. The reads are simpler without pads because defenders are not bringing the same physical aggression. The pocket does not collapse in the same way. The mental load on the quarterback is lighter when the physical consequences of every decision are removed from the equation. None of that diminishes what Shedeur showed. Clean footwork under those conditions still reflects real technical development. Early chemistry with Denzel Boston in those reps is still a meaningful signal about what these two players are building together. A locked-in mental approach is still visible to the people in that building regardless of whether pads are on or not. But the real test is coming, and it is coming soon. Todd Monken has been clear that he wants both quarterbacks tested in genuinely competitive live situations before anything approaching a final decision gets made. That means the preseason games are carrying an unusual amount of weight in this particular competition. In a normal settled quarterback situation, preseason games are essentially a formality, a chance to get the backup some reps and evaluate the bottom of the roster. In this situation, with the starting job genuinely available and two quarterbacks with real arguments on their side, those preseason snaps are essentially auditions in front of the entire NFL world. Every throw Shedeur makes under pressure in a preseason game is going to be dissected. Every decision he makes against real coverage, every time he holds the ball too long or gets happy feet in the pocket or delivers a ball into a window he should not have thrown into, every single thing is going to be analyzed by coaches, by the front office, and by every camera following this story around the league. That is enormous pressure for a second-year player. And it is also an enormous opportunity, because performing well under exactly that kind of pressure is how you make a statement that cannot be argued with by anyone with a clipboard. The front office is sitting with its own complicated set of pressures in the background of all this. The cap situation around Deshaun Watson's contract is not a secret. Sunk cost is a real psychological factor in how organizations make decisions, even when the people making them know intellectually that sunk cost should not drive forward-looking choices. There are real financial and structural consequences to how this competition is ultimately resolved, and pretending those consequences are not sitting somewhere in the background of every conversation happening inside that building would be naive. But here is what Shedeur Sanders actually controls in the middle of all of that: his reps, his decisions, his footwork, his relationships with the receivers he is building chemistry with, his mental state every single morning when he walks into that facility. That is his lane, and from everything coming out of the first 2 days of this camp, he is staying in it exactly the way you would want a young quarterback with something real to prove to stay in it. Clean, focused, competitive, and showing up every single day ready to earn something rather than waiting for it to be handed to him. That is what makes the next few weeks of this camp genuinely worth watching closely. Gridiron ground family. So here is where we land after all of it. Day 2 of Browns training camp gave us real, tangible evidence that Shedeur Sanders is not just surviving in this situation. He is competing in it. Clean footwork that the coaching staff called out as improved, early chemistry with a rookie receiver, a mentally disciplined approach to an environment full of pressure and outside noise, and a supporting cast around him that is quietly more interesting than the broader conversation gives it credit for. None of it is conclusive yet. The pads are coming on. The preseason games are coming. The AFC North is waiting. And the real test of everything we saw on day 2 is still ahead. But a young quarterback who went through what Shedeur went through on draft night and showed up to camp locked in and ready to stack clean days one after another, that is not a small thing. Here at Gridiron Ground, we are going to be watching every single step of this story as it develops. If you are not subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of breakdown you are going to want to have in your feed every single time something happens with this Browns camp. Hit that subscribe button. The Gridiron Ground family does not miss a rep.